So, welcome to Seattle Atheist Church. Atheist, agnostic, skeptic, whatever you like to call yourself, including believer or questioning, you are welcome here at Seattle Atheist Church. We call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural promoted from the podium. Our church is founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics. Truth claims are attempted here, and we stand ready to revise our thinking in light of new information. We attempt to be excellent to other conscious beings, and we believe in good, because good works in non-mysterious ways. If that sounds right to you, then you are probably in the right place. So the way we do it is the members ourselves give the talk, and then afterwards we get into a discussion circle, which ends at about 1:30 for some more free mingle time. Everyone is invited to the planning meetings. If you feel that you're getting something out of church, we would invite you, first time, be our guest for free, for sure. And if you can, invite a friend. And if you can, there's a donation jar in the back of the room. So all the donations just go to rent the room. That's what we do with it. Anything else coming up? Third Saturday of the month at Browers at 3 o'clock. We have a secular social. Everyone is invited. It's 21 and older. Our board games were yesterday, right?
The second Saturday.
Second Saturday of the month, we have board games at the Waver Coffee House, and everyone is invited to that.
So it's getting renamed to Distant Worlds Coffee House.
The Distant Worlds Coffee House. What do you know when it's going to be renamed?
No, but I know it's imminent.
Okay, so
on that name, so it may end up. It's easier to search for it by whatever name is coming up, and I'm not sure when.
okay, that's awesome.
I'm surprised they didn't do that earlier.
They hadn't decided yet.
Yeah. Another way that you can help is to sign up on Meetup if you're going to be attending the talks, because it's always easier for someone to be the 24th person attending a talk than to feel like if they show up, they might be the 4th person attending the talk. So, without further hesitation, our speaker today is Karen. Please come up.
Can you hear me? All right, hello, my name is Karen Carr. I haven't been here in a while because I've gotten all busy with a new job, but this is a topic that I am particularly inspired about. Let's see, I work in biological research, and like gender gender and power in the biological science is definitely a big issue. I mean, there are 50% of all PhD students are women, and yet they're a strong minority in leadership positions, in full professorships. Those tend to be all white men, and this diversity issue, of course, is bigger than a gender issue. It's an everything issue. So this is an area that I've paid a lot of attention to. So when I joined the particular area of research that I work in, which uses the molecular modeling software Rosetta, we have an annual conference, which is like a fun cult where we all get together in the woods, and we all stay in cabins together, and we have talks on our research. And it's all very inspiring, and it's inspiring scientifically, and it's inspiring in terms of our career trajectories, and it's extremely biased in that everyone in power is a white, straight man from the United States, which is a slight hyperbole. There's definitely a few women among them. There's a few Asian men among them. That's about it for our community, which is sad and unfortunate. But even among the people that came to this conference, it was, I think at the time, like 11% female, and we weren't even tracking statistics at a time, so I can't tell you any other diversity numbers for our community. But the Rosetta community, thanks to this brilliant white male American straight man who happened to really care about diversity, started to really address the issue and try to make changes. And oftentimes it has to be someone in a position of power who is the very thing that is able to become in that position has to take the reins and make a change. And Jeff Gray is the person who really did that. So he started a diversity and inclusion group. He started driving things to bring in women and people of color and being vocal among the community that were driving towards this. So he eventually, one thing that he ended up doing, which ended up inspiring me a great deal, was in having a keynote speaker at our annual conference, and that was this summer. And Dr. Joyce Yen was invited, and she gave the greatest talk I've ever heard on inspiring change in the research community, or in which is applicable to any community, really. So I just wanted to talk about a lot of the topics that she talked about in her talk. So without being completely plagiaristic, I'm going to talk on a lot of the topics that she discussed. But if you do want to look more into her, Dr. Joyce Yen at the University of Washington, she's in charge of a diversity leadership areas of research, and she gives amazing talks, and I recommend you look into her. So, from my perspective, the Rosetta community is the thing that was the most interesting about her talk, because she talked about things that we among the community can do to become leaders. So I want to talk specifically about the kind of things that she talked about, because the take-home really is that because we have this diversity and inclusion committee, the Rosetta community is then led to believe that we've got this problem fixed, and we as individuals in the group need to do nothing. And that is oftentimes a reason why organizations that are the least effective are the ones that have a committee like this, because everyone then feels like they can be relaxed, because people are in charge of this, and we can all sit back and do nothing. And in order to move forward, we all need to think about how every single one of us can be an active leader in improving diversity in our group. And of course, the people that feel the urge to spread diversity are usually not the people in power. So at this group, when all of us got together and we talked about what we specifically can do to bring more diversity and inclusion into our organization, we feel like we can't do anything. But that is definitely not true. And I'm going to talk about explicitly what you can do to improve diversity and bring the feeling of inclusion to whatever community you're involved in. And these are steps that I personally have done in my organization. Both at the place I work and amongst the Rosetta community. So hopefully this will also inspire you to follow Joyce Yen's advice and change the world. So one thing that's really important to keep in mind that a lot of places will bring this sensitivity training to organizations, and that's all well and good, but leadership is what we need. We need to have leadership training in ourselves, in our communities, so that every person involved can make active steps. So first off, we need to change the way we think. The world is an ugly, awful place, and it's very easy to get into a place of cynicism and assume that we can't change anything, and that is truly bullshit. That is not realism, that is giving up. So the step one is to realize that you can absolutely make change. And change will happen, because 50 years from now, I would not have been able to get a PhD. 50 years from now, I wouldn't even be able to own property. So things are changing, and you can be a part of it. And it's important to speak truth to power. So people in power definitely can end up in a place of arrogance, and we can look at that and say, well, they're just being authoritative and they know a lot. But that's not true. That's also bullshit. They are being arrogant by acting that way. And we need to point out when that situation happens. And that's not always easy, because we are under their thumb, basically. So people in that position need to be spoken to truth to power to, but in a way that won't destroy our lives. But in most circumstances, there are ways to make these things obvious and just talked about. So another thing that's bullshit is the idea that people need to develop a thick skin. That goes along with this the cynicism idea. So it's pointless to just allow callousness to exist and say, well, that we need to have thick skin and ignore things like that. Once again, we need to speak truth to power, and thick skin is not a good thing. It's not PC. It's not something that is should be tolerated. So step one, ignore the bullshit and move on to what reality really is, in which assholes need to be, maybe I shouldn't curse so much. But assholes are assholes. Okay, so why is diversity important? I think everyone here is pretty much on board, and most people in polite society are on board with the idea that diversity is good, because that's it's just wrong to leave people out just because of irrelevant factors that are like grounded in our society. But explicitly, when it comes to organizations that are diverse, they literally make more money, and there's a good reason for that. If you are in a circle of people that are all agree to the same way of thinking, the group think is really easy. It's really easy to get into the pattern of that we don't have discourses that are at all uncomfortable, because we are a community that we all have the white man in power, and we have the people not of the majority are going to be silent. If these organizations that are like this tend to make stupid decisions, therefore they're less likely to make money. And people have done research to explicitly prove that organizations with diversity are used to and willing to have uncomfortable conversations, and this leads to smarter moves. And they make more money. If everyone saw the meme going around a few years ago about this this flotation device that looked like a tampon, there were no women in that room. They lost money over that. And there's constant examples like that. Let's see, what are the names of the dummies that they have in car test dummies, where they cause accidents and see what happens to the dummies? These are all male dummies. And I recently heard that the first time they ever got a female dummy, they put it in the passenger seat. So once again, that's groupthink. You make stupid decisions, and women literally got murdered because they weren't planning for women to be in the driver's seat. So we all agree it's a good idea. And it's not just because we want to be good people, it's because we want to be rich people and make smart decisions. Explicit bias is really obvious, and like I mentioned before, polite society, you're not allowed to say bullshit. So our biggest problem in the world is those unconscious biases. So our conscious thought isn't going to say, I think that white males are smarter. We all know that. Not that white males are smart, that intelligence has nothing to do with the color of your skin or whether you have a penis or not. It has to do with other factors. But unconsciously, even people who are not white men automatically assume that a position of power that has to be intellectual will go to a white man. And that is an unconscious bias. And it is really important that we keep these in mind, even though I explicitly believe in diversity and inclusion. That does not mean that my subconscious understands that. I uncomfortably took the Harvard bias study where you're given a test to run through, and the example I took where you have you just have two buttons to push on the desktop. And so it gives you two things. And if it is a good thing, you click the button on the left. And it's a bad thing, you click the button on right. And then it swaps it. So you're having to run back and forth between the good thing on the left or the good thing on the right, and back and forth. Then you add things like female, male, black, white, good, bad, higher, lower. And it's quite rapidly narrowed down that I had a hard time having good and black together while having white and bad together. I can't even say it. So that hurts, but it's really important that I understand that, because at some point in my life, I'm going to unconsciously believe something, or unconsciously think something that will move into action in my life. So, like, no matter how liberal we are, we need to keep these in mind, because we do unintended things, and we create situation that implies things that we don't believe. And this is, of course, highly backed in research. So there's a lot of research studies where they have tested various things, where like they've taken resumes and sent them into a company, and they would have like completely identical resumes, but they would put a male name or a female name or a black sounding name or a foreign sounding name, or have organizations in their personal data that implied who they are. And of course, the companies would call back for positions of power, they would call back white people, and they would call back men. Then this was true for companies, this was true for faculty situations, recommendation letters. They found that the language people wrote when they were writing recommendation letters were used different languages for men versus women. And these were all subconscious things. And a recommendation for women could be glowing and lovely, but they would talk more about how great their training was. And with men, they would say how great their intellect was. And it was just a subconscious thing that this is how you say nice things about a man versus a woman. Again, there was another research study using lab manager applications where they just changed the male-femaleness. Teachers, students evaluating their teachers. And I think the most interesting, of course, is the fact that this bias was there whether the people doing the choosing were men or women or people of color. It's a subconscious thing. No matter how woke you are, the part of your brain is sick and wrong. So the topic of bias. People describe different ways bias exists. So we've got confirmation biases. So if you expect data to be a certain way, then you'll often feel like it's running that way. So it's often easy to make bias on an in-group basis. So if I meet a white girl from Kansas, there's a good chance I'm just automatically going to like her for no reason. There's a halo effect of people that are assumed to be good people. Let's see, there's a cloning concept, which is also follows into the in-group concept. There's negative stereotypes and positive stereotypes stereotypes are just as biased and a bad idea. So there's the bias that an Asian is going to be have scholastically better. So there are higher standards for getting into school if you're an Asian. So there's negative side effects to all biases. So the reason these are important, and more importantly, how do we avoid them, is that these things come out when we're not thinking about them and when we have to make decisions in a split second. So if I've got a very complicated task, if I'm doing the hiring and I have like 97 applicants and I have to go through all of these, by the time I reach applicant 5, I'm really bored. And I'm also getting tired and everything starts to look the same. So in these situations, or if I'm under stress, or if I haven't had sleep, or just, normal life, if I'm fatigued and I'm making a decision, then that's a moment where my unconscious biases are going to start making effect. And this is just really hard. This affects all of our lives. We are all biased. But if we keep these in mind and we have patterns and ways to avoid that, then we can keep ourselves and others from being biased. So be mindful in a place of work or in a community who is likely to feel the bias. Or if you notice bias, it's always a good idea to be supportive. Educating others is super important. And most importantly is to enact institutional changes, because there is literal steps you can make to change these things. So leadership training in your organization is going to be the first, most important step that you can take. You need to change the norms in your organization. And there are some great examples of people who have done this. My favorite example, Joyce Yin brought this up at the Rosetta Conference this August. So there was a school, I believe it was University of Michigan. It was an engineering department. So computational engineers is a strongly white male field. So there's an incredible amount of bias there. And they had a very small number of women in their professorship levels. So they made a conscious decision to change the way they do things. And over, it was less than 10 years, they ended up with literally 50% female professors in their department. And the person who had driven this institutional change was often asked how he did it, and the assumption would always be that they lowered their standards to allow women into the position, which of course is infuriating. But he said that the way they changed it was to do two things, basically. When they did their hiring for professors, they added an explicit rubric, a list of criteria for who they hired. And the second thing they did is to, on the rubric, the list of things that were required for you to be considered for a position is to add the fact that you take diversity as an important fact in the community. So we love white men, but it's easy for a white man to not find it, easier, I should say, for it to not find diversity important. And they are not helpful to a community that wishes to be successful and have diversity and be an inclusive environment. And it should be a requirement that someone considers diversity important. So it is a valid life choice to exclude people that do not make this an important criteria. So simply changing their rubric by requiring specific requirements for everyone who's up for a position of professorship and requiring diversity quite easily made it quite to improve the diversity in the engineering department. So that is exactly what we should be doing in our organizations and our lives. So that is how you change the culture, is by explicitly having rubrics. Another great example, there was a group that studied people who got publications when they were working on their PhDs. And that's explicitly useful to my case, because I'm in research. You publish or perish. So you go through your PhD program, and if you don't have good publications, that decreases your probability of getting a good postdoc. And if you don't get good publications there, it's going to be hard to get a professorship, and so on and so on. So it is fundamentally necessary to get good publications. And yet, if you statistically look at who gets published in research labs, the white men get more published, even though they're not the majority. And that is because of the unconscious bias of the professors. But there was one group that did not have that statistic. So statistically speaking, when they compared underrepresented minority groups, women, and non-underrepresented minority male groups, they all had the same rate of publication. In this chemistry department, And I did not put down the institution where that was. So they studied why that was, and they had the same thing that this University of Michigan did, where they had an explicit rubric. So every student had a committee that was in charge of their education, and one of the requirements is that they got publications out. And so in this group, the publications were quite even. So this simple rubric set up these students on an equal footing, that anyone who did a good job could move forward in their career. Because we are explicitly under the thumb whoever our supervisors are. So if that supervisor is required to follow a set out guideline, then everyone who wants to do well does do well. And you see things fall apart on these minorities. So in short, ambiguity serves as fertile ground for the expression of bias. So to explicitly change how things happen, we have to plan things out and make lists in every situation where bias is going to play a part. So the takeaways here are: we have to acknowledge our inner biases. We have to build an accountability mechanism in your organization. So these are words that many of us took to heart who were at this conference in August, and we had discussions amongst ourselves, and we all brought those back to our communities. So I work at Cyrus Biotechnology. Our leaders are very open to this kind of discussion. So I asked if it was okay if we had a follow-up talk where the entire organization came and sat down, and I basically explained everything that she had said at this conference, and we all talked about what we explicitly can do to avoid bias. And we were about to do a couple of hirings, and so we implemented those plans where we made a specific list of what's important in hiring. And we have a couple good hires since then, so I'm thinking that worked out. They seem to be really good people. One of them was a woman. I don't know if I wasn't involved in explicit hiring, so I don't know if that was a factor. We don't have problems with diversity as much in our group because the founders of our company brought in a diverse crowd, so they already thought in a very inclusive way. But of course, more things are important. You have to also think about who's getting raises, who's moving up in their positions. I got a raise after that. I mean, I don't think it had anything to do with it, but that's a good sign that we're thinking in an inclusive way. So it's not just who gets hired, it's who gets promotions. We made plans for how we touched base once or twice a year about how we think things are going and having constant conversations. So the take home is we can all make change. Even if you're not in a position of power, you can talk to people in your crowd and talk to those in position of power and discuss that these things are important and there is a fix for it. To basically be mindful of our bias, make plans for how to change the bias, make explicit guidelines whenever we're in a position where bias can change things. So I guess that's my main points of view on this topic, and I would love for us to discuss how we can be leaders in our own lives in all the organizations that we are involved with, and talk about what steps we can do to improve inclusion. Thank you very much.